shenanigans, truth, lies, 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 shenanigans. Tune in to TLS. Yeah, tune in to TLS. It's the TLS show. Coming to you live from the TLS show.
Hey, I'm Neil Nix. Welcome to Truth, Lies, Shenanigans podcast. We're back for a new season 5. And today we have your favorite co-host back, Robbie Rock and Gianni Storm. How's it going today, guys? How's it going? Welcome back.
Hey
It's going great.
guys.
We had a long time
I-
off. Haven't seen you guys since a Halloween episode. So how did you spend your time off? Did you guys enjoy your holidays?
Oh my
What'd
goodness.
you do, Gianni?
Oh my goodness. It's been really transformative since our last get together in a good way.
Okay.
I just had a lot happen to me. As you guys know, I've switched positions, switched careers.
Right.
So that's been interesting. It's taken the majority of my time. I'm actually going to be moving soon and still between two places, still deciding. So it's been an interesting few months.
Okay. All right. So you've done a lot with your time off.
I would like to suggest maybe a city with less Confederate monuments. Just saying.
Yes.
I'll keep
Atlanta
that in
does have
mind.
some Confederate monuments.
because I care, my friend. Because I care.
Wait, did they
Um,
tear
Scary.
down some of those monuments? I thought they tore
They
down some
did.
of those.
Yeah.
Not in
I'm
Stone
talking about
Mountain.
Oh, no.
Yeah,
you.
Yeah.
the whole rock face. That's not going anywhere anytime soon.
No. Nope.
But no, my break was spent well. I did some
Good.
production work, some movie work with my friends Dustin and Richard, Low Bar Productions, and More Sound and Film because he's rebranding. But yeah, winter's finally here, so I can start sliding in my backyard. I can fit by moving snow, but we're just having fun with it.
Yeah.
We're having
Aw.
fun. With it.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah.
Good.
We haven't seen snow in the DC area in over 2 years. So
Wow.
measurable snow, anything over like an inch, we haven't seen anything. And then on top of that, when it happened 2 years ago, it was maybe like 3 inches and then it melted the next day. So it's like
I
it doesn't
remember
really
that.
Not
count.
We
real
were-
snow.
Yeah, it didn't count.
so
Slush
we really-
isn't snow.
we
Slush is
haven't
not
really
snow.
had snow in a very
No.
long time here. So I missed the
Oh.
snow actually. So
We bought a GT snow racer for ourselves for Christmas, so we're getting some use out of it now.
oh,
Lucky.
wonderful. So that
Aw,
should be fun.
that's sweet.
That should be a
Yeah,
lot of
that
fun.
is.
It's fun exercise.
I bet. I bet that is.
Walking uphill. Woo!
Goodness.
Yeah, and for my holidays, I just kind of relaxed, with the podcast going every week and then, podcast network and everything. I was really getting kind of
Yeah.
overwhelmed up until like Halloween and that last episode. So it's been kind of good, relaxing, kind of like just chill
break.
time for me, kind of like get resettled, revamped. So I'm excited. I'm excited about our time now.
Yeah.
I'm excited about our new format. So for our longtime listeners, for season 5, we are changing our format quite a bit. First, we're no longer live. We do want to apologize to our regulars. We had a lot of regulars that would tune in live, and we really enjoyed having them as part of the conversation because that was a key aspect, and that's why we were always going live because we wanted to have people as part of the conversation.
Right.
But on the bright side of things, we are now investing a lot more time to discuss some of these topics. We can kind of get into these topics and you kind of hear more of our conversation on it. I think the new format should be a lot of fun. Hit us up on our socials. Let us know what you
Let
think
us
about
know.
this format, right? And let us know if there's anything you miss or wish we bring back. I mean, we did drop the game show, so you might be able to talk us back into the game show. We'll see how that happens, but but let us know. Let us know what you think. All right, so let's go ahead and get straight into our first topic of the season. Now, while we were off, a lot of our listeners reached out asking for us to talk about this, and it's been making headlines, stirring debates all over the Israel-Gaza conflict, right? And I personally have a lot to talk about on this, so we're going to break it down into a 2-part episode. So In today's episode, we want to discuss why there's so much conflict in that region. And we're going to try to answer the question, is the Gaza Strip being oppressed by Israel? And is Hamas simply the resistance? And by the end of this, we're going to ask the question, is this truth, lies, or shenanigans? Before we get started, what I'd like to do is establish that this conversation may include opinions that are negative towards Israel, Palestine, or other countries, and their policies and their tactics. But I want to make it clear our comments are intended to be related to those groups or countries and should not be construed as anti Semitic or anti Muslim because we are all anti hate. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. Now, what I want to first do is let me break it down a little bit. Now, this area we now call Israel and the Palestine
Yeah.
territories, it's been a part of conflict for ages. But I want to start with what's going on right now. I know we want to keep our episodes a little more evergreen, but we've got a major issue going on. In our previous seasons, we were all about hot topics, right? So, in case people don't know the details of what's happening right now, let me go ahead and go through the timeline of events. So, on October 7th, that's 2023, Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups launched a deadly assault on Israel. Now, the attack included capturing civilians as hostages, leading to over 1,200 Israeli deaths. Now, Israel responded pretty much immediately with bombardments on Gaza, causing over 20,000 Palestinian deaths, including more than 8,000 children. These are innocents. And there's a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Israel imposed a siege on Gaza from October 9th, cutting off electricity and other critical resources. There's a severe shortage of water, food, medicines, affecting hospitals, essential services. There have been bombings on hospitals. Over 1.1 million people were displaced in northern Gaza. Both Israeli forces and Palestinian armed groups have committed serious international law violations that likely amount to war crimes. The UN has been warning about the risk of genocide against Palestinians due to Israeli actions. Hamas continues to hold hostages. Now, if you're on social media, you've also seen countless stories about the atrocities against the innocent people in Gaza. So you're seeing two sides of it now. But I was actually looking at one of the interviews, and it was one of the saddest stories for me. There's a young girl, Dunia Abu Mohsen, is a 12-year-old who lost a leg, and her entire family in an Israeli airstrike had an interview. And it was during the 7 days of paused bombing. There was a pause in bombings at Israel and there's sort of a truce. And they did this interview with her. It went viral, and she says in the video, I just want the war to end, right? She just lost her family, her leg. Just days later, Israel resumed bombing and Dania's body was found in the rubble of an Israeli airstrike on a hospital, the same hospital that the interview happened. I was just struck by that. And there are countless stories coming out of Gaza of just the atrocities going on, right? So before I get into the history, and there's a deeper history to the conflict, before I get into that, I'd like to get you guys' thoughts and insights on the current war and what's happening now. Robbie, why don't you start us off?
Fair enough. As you alluded to it in your preamble, one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist, right? So, depending on your lens,
I
I
like
know
that.
that there have been civilian targets in Palestine, specifically when the hospitals were bombed. But to think of it as two tiers. You have what's at the surface level, and then you have a tunnel network, an entire infrastructure that's been developed over decades that basically infiltrates everywhere. So, in that sense, they have justification to use it as a military target. But to think that a hospital is being used as military infrastructure by either side
Mm-hmm.
is deplorable. But it's absolutely horrendous. I have a professor at our university who has family in Israel. One he lost a nephew who was just shot at point blank range, and
Oh my
he's
God.
a student.
Oh my
So
God.
the hate and the anger lives on both sides. The suffering and the heartache lives on both sides, and it's something that has been created, something that continues because of the geopolitical powers that
Mm-hmm.
exist and continue to exist.
Mm-hmm.
As far as war crimes are considered, I know that they're looking at Netanyahu and having these charges pressed against him
Hmm.
because, yeah,
I mean, I think it's
nobody wants to see civilian death.
yeah,
No,
and I
nobody
think that's
wants to
my
see that.
biggest problem with this is the civilian deaths,
It's
right?
everybody's
It's
problem.
almost they don't care. I mean, it's like we're just going to bomb this place, we're going to bomb that place, and I get what you're saying that there are these tunnels and they're using it as a military. I get it, but there is a tack that you can take to reduce civilian casualties. You don't just go bombing uh, irrespective of the fact that there are civilians there. If there is a bank robbery, you don't just go in killing all the hostages or other people inside the bank to kill the bank robbers. That doesn't make any sense. You take
It's
a tack.
reminiscent of the it's reminiscent of the invasion of Iraq. Oh, they've got WMDs. Do they?
Yep.
Mm.
Yep.
Well, speaking for some people in my age and generation, we're kind of confused with which side to not necessarily take, but understand. Because it's atrocities on both sides, as we've seen. And a lot of the media plays a part in how we form our opinions on this war. And I think that my biggest issue is kind of similar to what Rob said, the casualties. Of course, that's everybody's biggest issue is the innocence that is being taken.
Mhm.
Also, the fact that I hear that there's like food, there's supplies, there's basically
Food
resources for the
shortages.
people
Mhm.
that are being, yeah, that are being taken away or not even being able to be get into the country and help those people.
Yeah.
Those are my biggest concerns. I think that it's hard to really understand who's to blame here and who should we point the finger at. I think that
That is
once
one of the
Neil gets
hardest
into a
things.
little bit, it's hard to point the finger, and I'd like to get into that. I'd like
And,
to hear what you guys have
and
to say.
yeah, because I mean, I think that's what we need to think about, right? Is like we need to figure out who is
There is someone who carries the burden of responsibility for
Of
the
course.
state of our current state of affairs.
because that's the only way you stop it, right? The only way is somebody to say, hey, we can't do this anymore. It can't happen anymore. To build those bridges to say, hey, we're going to fix this, right? We're going to resolve this. But it just hasn't happened. Johnny, you alluded to this, is that a lot of people think that this conflict is something that's maybe been happening on and off since the 80s, right? Because that's
Yeah.
when in our lifetime, that's kind of what we've been hearing about. But this goes back to biblical times, right? So let me just
Mhm.
give you a quick timeline of like key historical moments. And there's way more than my list here, right? Because I was researching, I'm like, oh my God, it's just so much. I can't even put it all in a timeline for this podcast episode. It's just, but let me try to give you guys some of the key timelines. So in about 1000 BC, King David established Jerusalem as the capital of the Jewish kingdom. Now, all of the religions consider Jerusalem sacred, all
Mhm.
of the major religions, so Muslims, Christians, Judaism.
All the Abrahamic faiths.
Thank you. All the Abrahamic faiths.
Mhm.
They consider it an ancestral site, a place that belongs to them. In ancient times, Jerusalem was believed to be actually the center of the world. It's also where, of course, Jesus Christ was crucified and supposedly, according to the Bible, resurrected by God. I know, Gianni. I know how you feel about that, Gianni. According
Take
to
out
the
the
Bible.
supposedly, and we're good.
Okay.
Uh,
According to
yeah.
the Bible. I'm just going to leave it according to the Bible.
We like that. We
The,
like that.
the New Testament. So in the 17th century, there was the Arab conquest. Arabs took over. Jerusalem became a holy city in Islam at that point. And in the Middle Ages, they were attacked by crusaders. Then there was the Ottoman period. Now, the Ottoman period lasted 300 years, and they controlled the region of Jerusalem and the surrounding areas as part of their empire. 300 years until World
Goodness.
War One, where the Ottoman Empire fell. Then in 1917, after the Ottoman Empire fell,
Mhm.
Britain decided that they wanted to get in on it.
Mm.
So what they did is they supported establishment of a national home for Jewish people in Palestine. And it was a strategic location. It provided influence in the Middle East for geopolitical advantage that Robbie was talking about.
Hmm.
And there was an alliance with the Zionist movement to bring Western-oriented governance to the region. It provided a lot of value, not to mention, of course, oil and resources in the area.
Right.
Although oil wasn't a big
I,
consideration then, but
At that
resources
I
time.
were.
think that it's very important to note that yes, it was Britain who basically took Palestine from the Ottoman Empire. And
Hmm.
with the atrocities that were committed against the Jewish people during World War II, that's when the idea that was planted in 1917 really took hold. And the powers that be said, hey, you know what? Yes, we're going to establish this as a state for the Jewish population. But what this means is the current residents
What
had to go
happened to
somewhere
them?
else.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. So it was. So it was accepted by the UN and the Allied powers, but the Arab world said, "Well, wait a minute, what's going on? This isn't correct at
Just
all,"
Hmm.
and quite
just to be
rightfully
clear,
so.
World War One, not World War Two. World War Two didn't happen until 1939.
And until
Yeah. When you said
yeah. So but
1917, I was like,
so that's World War One. Yes, but we're talking 1947, like because when you
Right, I
got
haven't gotten
to
there yet. So, so
but
in
Okay.
so that was so that's 1917, right? So
Hmm.
1917, they decided this is what we need to do. We need to go into settle our Jewish people there. And then 1948, well, 1920 to 1948, there was a British mandate for Palestine. Now, the mandate established by the League of Nations, which was a preamble to the UN, basically gave Britain administrative control over Palestine after World War One. Like Rob B was just saying, British people basically invaded with the support of allies, the League of Nations.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. So 1947, and this is what Rob B was talking about. This 1947, 48, this is when they established the state of Israel.
Mm. Okay.
Israel did not exist prior to 1948. It's in essence a British colony, right?
Mhm.
In essence. And it was established as the state of Israel. So they took over an area of Palestine and said, hey, this is Israel. We own it. There was a war. They basically kicked out a bunch of Arab Muslim people out of their homes and said, get out of here.
That's insane. So Israelites or Israelis are a mix between British and Palestinian
It's
together?
it's
No.
mostly it's mostly British
Oh,
Jewish people who settled the area, who immigrated to that area to claim it as their holy land.
To claim
insane.
it
Okay.
as a Jewish state, a place where they belonged.
Right. And so they kicked them
So
out.
yes, so it was a massive displacement, Johnny.
Massive.
So it's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
So I'm glad
That's
that you're
insane.
wrapping your head around it, because when you're saying that you're confused about what's going on, the history of it really plays into everything, and
Why?
it's important to understand that history in order to form a centrist
Yeah.
kind of opinion on what's going on.
And if you're on social media or TikTok, you've probably seen the jokes about, Joe Biden is older than the country of Israel.
True.
So our president of the
That's
United States is clearly is
now they get it.
older is older than the country of Israel because again, it wasn't established till 1948. And again, war
Mm.
kicked people out, and then they kind of created this area for refugees called the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and that was all
Okay.
part of that process. And the West Bank, for geography's sake, the West Bank is west of Israel, very close. It kind of surrounds Jerusalem, so it's close to Jerusalem. And then the Gaza Strip is just a small little area along the Mediterranean coast and the border of Egypt.
Egypt.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So it's just a little tiny area, but they're kind of separated by Israel. All right. Just the geography is kind of important here too, in terms of the current conflict.
Location.
Yeah. By the way, 1949, Gaza Strip went under Egyptian control. So in
Mm.
1949, after they broke off, Egypt took over Gaza Strip. So now, 1967, there was a 6-day war It was called the Six-Day War. Israel decided to take the Gaza Strip from Egypt. That war created a greater rift between Israel and other Arab countries in the area.
Oh my
So,
goodness.
right. So now they're creating more conflict, right? And then
Tension.
1978, 79, Egypt and Israel signed a peace treaty. Now,
Okay.
Egypt recognized Israel, but was kind of unresolved on the Gaza Strip. They didn't say that, hey, you own the Gaza Strip. Now,
Mhm.
1987, 1993, after years of repression from Israel, Palestinians had an uprising in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So they had an
Mm.
uprising against Israel. And in 1995, after years of fighting, they signed a treaty and they worked for a two-state solution. So the Palestinian Authority was allowed limited control over the West Bank and the Gaza Strip in
Mhm.
a pseudo government.
Mm.
Then in 2000 to 2005, there was another uprising, increased violence, bombings, what they refer to as terrorism. And then in 2005, Israel decided to pull out of the Gaza Strip. Remember, they took it over from Egypt. Um,
Yeah.
so they finally, in 2005, pulled out from the Gaza Strip, removing all the Israeli settlers and military presence. They just moved out. So kind of leave the Gaza Strip to them. Now,
Finally.
since then, of course, they've been wanting to take it back over. I mean, it's a key area because it's a strip along the Mediterranean
Popular.
coast, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Anywhere,
Mhm.
anytime you have coastline, there's shipping, there's other key things, right? That you get resources, etc. Um,
Right.
so, but in 2006, after Israel pulled out, Gaza Strip held elections, and Hamas, a more resistant or militant group, won. So now the Palestinian Authority, who was managing the West Bank, no longer was managing the Gaza Strip. So now we have two different factions. And keep in mind, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip were separated by Israel. So it's hard to govern
Mhm.
in that way because you have to
It
go
is
through
hard.
Israel to get to the Gaza Strip. So it's not unexpected that a new government would form. And of course, they've also had the influence of Egypt. They were taken over by Israel for a period of time. So it's not surprising.
Yeah.
Um, and
No,
it's not
historically, this happens with any annexed territory.
exactly. And you think about it like the movies, right? Movies, how many times have we seen movies where there's this superpower who's just oppressive, taking over? You know, I keep thinking about the movie District 9, which was more about
Mm.
apartheid. It was
I've
kind of
heard of it.
it's an
Mhm.
interesting story where you have like aliens show up, these super powerful aliens show up, and they kind of take over, and then it creates this void and this poor area called District
Yeah.
9. Very similar.
It's an alien.
Go ahead.
They're technologically advanced. They arrive on Earth, but then their ship is disabled. They can't leave. So now there are displaced people that need a place to reside. So they find a place in Africa, but then they have to displace an entire population, and that's what it's. So it is about
Yeah.
apartheid, but it also calls to what happened with the creation of Israel. Absolutely.
Exactly. Exactly. It's very, very similar. I mean, I suggest anybody look at it to kind of get a feel or sense of and what it's like to be
What's going
oppressed in
on?
that way. And then, when we look at what's happening with Hamas and we look at these attacks, and they are reprehensible without a doubt. Attacks are reprehensible. Death, killing people, reprehensible, just as reprehensible as bombing Gaza, right?
Mhm.
But with that being said, you can start to see and understand now why there is resistance, why there is now some attacks, some forms of resistance. Even if they're
Yeah.
militant, you start to
Mhm.
recognize why, the why
Why?
behind it. Again, not saying it's right.
And I think that it's important to recognize that it becomes generational also, because if you are a 12-year-old who loses a limb or loses an entire family.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you're left without a support system. And I know that Hamas offers a lot of social services. And
They
so
do.
They do.
at that point, it's absolutely, if you're taking these people in, it's easy to have them adopt your ideas, your ideology, and have
Right.
them act upon it. Yeah.
Yep. So that's the
It's a good
history.
point.
That's the history. That's the timeline. Now I just want to get your thoughts on the historical roots of the conflict and how do you believe the history has influenced the current situation. And I kind of want to start with Gianni because Gianni's this is she was didn't understand it,
Right.
and she's kind of learning. So now that you understand a little
Yeah.
bit more, what are your initial thoughts?
It definitely helps to understand because what we see, like we mentioned, America is pro-Israel because of their ties and allies and all of that. So it's good to understand, like you said, the cause of why they're retaliating. I did want to ask, like, because I know I've read online that there were multiple peace treaties between them, and then something would happen
Mhm.
a few years later, and then that peace treaty's void.
So yeah,
So
there
it's
have been
like,
a series of major conflicts in 2008,
Yeah.
2012, 2014, ongoing tensions, and they do peace treaties. But the thing is, you got to understand oppression. So, you know, uh, Israel controls the food, the water, um, borders. They control things coming in and out. So it creates a poor area, right? They're fighting, trying to just live and survive. If you were to ever go to the Gaza Strip, everyone is just poor, just trying to survive. And when you
yes,
have a major state like Israel controlling what happens, right? It would be different if they were an independent. Hey, we have our own water, our own food. You don't
yes.
have all these allies saying don't send them supplies.
Mhm.
Don't do trade with this group. You know, that's what's happening. They're saying, don't do trade, don't do this. They've kind of ostracized this area. I saw this one video where there was this woman, and you can see a lot of blown out buildings, a lot of rubble all around her. And this was early in the fighting, the bombings, and she's just crying hysterically. And they have the subtitles at the bottom, and she's yelling, saying, I swear to you, my children died hungry and thirsty. So it's just an indication of how awful the conditions are, where people are just dying hungry. So is it at all surprising that they would rise up, that they would retaliate? Is it Robbie?
And in
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Johnny.
I just had one more question. In Gaza, there's mainly Palestinians, just to get an answer on that. Are there mainly
Mhm.
Palestinians?
Correct.
Okay,
Mhm.
okay.
Right. Now, Robbie, I liked your comment about it's generational because that's important to note how, when someone's parents, entire family is killed, how that impacts them. When,
Mhm.
they're losing a limb because of, these conflicts between Hamas, the resistance, or as they call them, the terrorists. And
And that's it. I mean, if they're dubbed a terrorist in the media, if you are this young child who has been adopted by the social services and they are fighting against the oppressor, who then this is your savior, this is your freedom fighter.
yep.
So it's very easy to indoctrinate someone into that, like I was saying, into your ideology. And it's it the creation of the state of Israel absolutely has a huge impact on how things are playing out today, because the displacement of the Palestinian Arabs was not done properly. I mean, it was done for geopolitical reasons and thinly veiled for religious reasons. But at the end of the day, you're still creating a humanitarian conflict by displacing these people initially. Do I believe that the Jewish people deserve a state of their own, a place to call their own, especially after all of the atrocities that were committed to them during World War II? Absolutely. But I don't know what that actual solution was. I don't know how to implement that properly. Should we have looked at other parcels of land that were available? Sure,
Yeah.
Greenland may have been an option, but for religious purposes, it had to be it had to be in that part of the
Israel,
world. It had to be Jerusalem because
Jerusalem.
you have your
Yeah,
Abrahamic faith, and all three of them have the same root. So they
yeah.
all lay claim to the same root area, and that's the source of the conflict.
A sense of entitlement, though. You know,
Yes.
Jerusalem is mine, right? That's all of them are
Yeah.
saying this. All of them are saying Jerusalem is part of my religion. It's ancestral. It's my
Our ancestry. Yeah.
right. It belongs to me. All of the religions are saying that. And just one more powerful organization who had more allies was able to take over and control. So
Mhm.
it's not surprising that the people in the area whose home it was who were displaced are fighting back and continue to fight back to this day,
Yeah, the whole time.
generations later.
Absolutely. I'm glad that we were talking about Egypt and the surrounding area because the establishment of Israel also led to the repercussions for Jewish communities in other Arab nations.
Mm,
So a lot of them faced
Oh,
persecution
wow.
and expulsion, leading to a significant migration of Jews from Arab countries to Israel. So it becomes a real melting pot. This becomes the Jewish population in the Middle East.
yeah.
That's huge.
Very
And
interesting.
it's
See, there's got to be a way
there's such a
to work together, right? To say, hey, this isn't just my space. This is our space. There's got to be a way to figure that out. And, it's hard to do now, given the centuries
Mm.
of conflict, the people who have suffered so much. It's hard to now get there, right? I don't see how that's happening. What do you think, Johnny? Do you think it's even
I
possible?
Not now, like you said, not when innocent, like you just told the story of that little girl that had that interview and then unfortunately passed away in a hospital. Why are we bombing hospitals? Um I think it's hard to because the tension is too high, right? Like I did want to talk about the United States and the part that we kind of played in the allies.
Hmm.
It seemed like the more hands that were in the pot, it became messier. Like,
I agree.
why did we have
Oh,
to
absolutely.
yeah, why did we have to get into it? The conflict itself, I don't think that this conflict would resolve itself, but I think that there's a different way we could have went about it instead of taking sides. I think we should have emphasized more the peace treaty or some kind of resolution. That's the only way to prevent innocent people dying,
Yeah.
basically. That's the only way.
Yeah, so I don't know exactly what Canada's doing for the conflict or for Israel. The United States is giving billions of dollars to Israel to help them in fighting.
Yeah.
I mean, I even put a
Mhm.
post on my
Like why?
Facebook page like, oh, so now we're giving billions of dollars to help with the genocide. Again, I feel like it's genocide. And the reason I feel like it's genocide is because we are killing innocents, irrespective of the fact that they are civilians. We're just killing, killing, killing. If we can't get more tactical, that's a problem.
Yeah.
I understand rooting out Hamas, but you don't root out Hamas by killing everyone else. So I just, so I'm angry with that. So I feel like there is a genocide going on. But
I
there's
agree.
not a lot being done to try to end the conflict, one, and also to help the civilians. I know you're about to say something, Rob.
Well, really, the root of the conflict is the displacement in that holy area that all
Yeah.
three factions consider holy. And now that you've had a massive migration of people of Jewish communities from other countries flooding into Israel, we can't undo it.
Yeah,
We
Nope.
can't undo it,
I
and
agree.
I don't know how we can get all these parties to get along
Yeah,
because we can't even get the same factions of the same flavor, Protestants and Christians to get along. You
yeah,
know, there's always a source of conflict. So if you're diverging those beliefs, and I hate to relegate it to that, but it really that is the source of the contention. It's this is what I believe, and then it creates a justification. So I understand where the powers of Palestine feel justified
hmm,
in taking their land back
yeah,
because they were displaced by the UN, by other foreign
Originally. Yeah.
powers, right? I mean, if Canada was on the losing end of a conflict and all of a sudden a people from across the ocean are making decisions about how my country is going to be divided up, who's going to believe what in what areas, what
you're gonna want to fight back.
I'm going to start losing my mind.
Hmm.
And so I really
Especially if they
understand that
come in and take your
oppression.
home and kick you out, or bombing and shooting and killing and sexually assaulting your friends and your family and neighbors, and I mean cutting off your water, cutting off your food, and not allowing trade. So now your family's going hungry. Yeah, I mean I get it. Anyway, go ahead.
And
I think to
oppression
be
brings out the worst in people.
Oppression certainly does.
Of course, it's like survival now. Now it's every man for himself. I think though that like they've been saying peace in the Middle East since I was like born, 95.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think
Mm.
for such a long time, wouldn't the old saying goes, somebody becomes the bigger person? Like, wouldn't you think like Israel's like, all right, we've killed so many people, we've tried. Let's let it go. Like, let them have the land. But I think Rob made a good point that it's the belief. The reason why it's such a strong and like ongoing long fight, because it's not just a battle of resources, it's deeper than that. Now you're tapping into, we are God's people.
Yeah.
And then these people are like, this is our land, we are God's people. So it's deep.
Yeah.
It's really spiritual, a spiritual war, to be honest.
All right, we're running out of time for this episode. So I wanted to just ask one last question because, and you talked about the bigger guy, bigger man, right? There were rumors that Israel was aware of the pending attacks, and prior to the attack by Hamas, Netanyahu was saying, vowing to destroy, quote unquote, destroy Hamas. And because he was also talking about invading the Gaza Strip again prior to the actual attack. I'm curious, do you think that, they had knowledge beforehand and kind of let
Let it
things
happen.
go to then now try to invade?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think so,
It's
yes.
it's absolutely possible. It's I mean, when Putin decided to start amassing his troops on the board, oh, it's a military exercise. No, nobody amasses
Mm,
that number of troops without having an intention. So, was there an
mhm.
intention to invade? I would say it's very possible, given the history of his leadership.
Hmm.
I think it's very possible that it was just orchestrated and to turn around and say, well, yes, there is a network, there is an infrastructure, and we have intel that there were high value targets that needed to be eliminated. And then the global population goes, oh, wow, okay, it's really awful, but there's a justification for it.
Right.
It's
Perfect.
that's how they try to pitch it, right? There needs to be some kind of reason to allow your allies to do such deplorable things.
Yeah.
And I
To get
hope
on
that we get
board.
into some of the economic factors that are at play in this also, because it's thinly veiled with religion, Johnny. I mean, that's the source of it. But why it's
Mhm.
perpetuated, there's a huge economic factor
I'm
that
glad you
plays
said
into
that.
this.
I
Okay.
totally agree with
Okay.
you. It is thinly veiled in religion and but it is about power,
It's about
control,
money.
money. Yep,
Okay.
100%. And I do want to
Access
point
to
out
resources.
that Netanyahu was actually ousted for a period of time, and he came back, and this was a good opportunity to establish himself. Not saying that was his intent, but I'm just saying there was an opportunity there. All right, unfortunately, we
Ironically.
are out of time for today's episode, so we need to wrap it up. Now, we've traveled to the complex history of Israel Gaza conflict. I've got to ask the question: is the Gaza Strip being oppressed by Israel and Hamas is simply the resistance? Is that the case? Is this truth, lies, or shenanigans? That Israel is the oppressor, Hamas is the resistance. Truth,
Oof.
lies, or shenanigans? And let me clarify, keep in mind, truth, we are changing it slightly, what shenanigans means. Truth
Yeah.
means you believe the statement is true. Lies means it's a lie, not true. And shenanigans means you believe there's some level of truth there, but maybe a little shenanigans, might be a lie also. Something's going on there. Basically, you're on the fence. All right. So, is this truth, lies, or shenanigans? Israel is the oppressor, Hamas is the resistance.
Mm. Based on what the knowledge that I have, I'm gonna say true. Israel
True.
is the oppressor.
Or
Yeah.
Israel is the oppressor, and Hamas is resistance. All right.
Is resisting. Yeah.
All right. Robbie?
I'm simply going to call shenanigans on all of it because of the sheer complexity and history of it. It's if we really want to point the finger at someone, then we need to look at the British occupation and the League of Nations, the UN, because they are the ones that established
Are the
this in the
oppressors.
first
Yeah.
place. They made it happen, and it gave them a foothold in the Middle East.
Dang, Rob, I was going with truth, and You just push me a little bit towards
Rob.
shenanigans. I'm going to stick with truth. I'm
Okay.
sticking with truth. Gianni, that Hamas is simply the resistance. Again, that doesn't mean I am supporting resistance or supporting their actions.
No.
None of us are doing that. We're simply
No.
speaking to how the dynamics are working.
Super complicated, though.
It is super complicated. All right. Next episode, we will dive into the world of the media coverage surrounding this Israel-Gaza conflict. It's a part 2, wondering how media colors our understanding of what's truly happening on the ground. Be sure to catch our podcast episodes on Tuesdays on Pods Network, podznetwork.com, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also catch some of our clips of this recording on YouTube, TLSShow.com. All right. Thanks, Gianni. Thank you, Rob B. This has been an enlightening, wonderful conversation. But most importantly, we need to thank you for listening to our shenanigans each and every week. Thanks for joining us.